this. This is not fertilizer. Nothing eats this stuff. If they did, it wouldn't be any good as carbon dioxide removal. Nothing eats this. When you make it in a furnace or in a fire at 400 C or above, what happens is it forms hard bonds. It bonds to itself in carbon rings and things. You're making buckyballs. No microbe in its right mind is going to spend the energy it takes to break those bonds. It's going to look for other food. If there's any food around at all, the microbe's going to go eat somewhere else. So what happens is 90% of this is going to be around 100 years from now. 85% of it's going to be around 1,000 years from now. There's biochar that's been carbon dated to 250 million years from forest fires when we had one continent. So what we're doing is we're changing the form of the carbon with the fire, but it's not fertilizer. It's habitat. It's a structure in the soil because it's not going to be anything a plant can eat. It's nothing that a microbe can eat and give to the plant. It's structure in the soil. It's creating something like a coral reef in the ocean, in the soil. So in the ocean, when the corals form a reef, all of the fish start to diversify. You get lots of different kinds of fish, sea snakes, different kinds of seagrass plants, lots of different corals. It's a nursery for the ocean. The same thing happens in the soil. The biological diversity of soil microorganisms after adding biochar spreads out like a fan, a giant DNA fan of all the diversity of microbes. And what is it? I'd have to do the math. Somewhere between 10 and 15% cemented. And that's just to provide a little bit of calcium so that the carbon has something to bond to. So I've got some straw in here. I've got some there's going to be some amount of labile carbon still in this because this was not really pure biochar. So I'm giving the carbon something to bond to, and it's going to bond to that calcium, and it's going to go back to stone. That calcium that's in the cement was once limestone, and it remembers back before it was taken to 3,000 degrees and made into lime powder. It was limestone, and it wants to be a stone again. It will do what it can to become a stone again. And so it just needs to bond with some carbon and some oxygen, and it will get back to being limestone again. So what we're doing by adding the biochar, which is with a little bit of carbon, labile carbonate, and a little bit of straw, is we're giving it everything it needs to go back to stone. So I can make a cob wall, we'll make some bricks now, and just that little bit of cement is enough to give it what it needs to be able to return to limestone eventually. It may be a century from now.
Could it be lime?
It could be, it should be. Didn't have any. But that's what I would use at home. I actually get my lime from a place in Nashville that makes acetylene, and so I get this pure CaO, and I take that and I put it in a 55-gallon barrel, and I add water, and I usually have it for anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, stirring it occasionally. And that makes me a lime putty that's just to die for. It's perfect for doing lime plasters and things, yeah? Back to the beginning. That's all right. It's all right. It's good. There are other people who just come too.
Yeah,
so,
I was going to
what
ask
we need to do is go back to tell you starting that story. You could say that this is charcoal.
If someone wants an Italian translation?
Anybody need Italian translation? You could say this is just charcoal. If you go to the store, the hardware store, the grocery store, the places you buy charcoal.
Abbiamo un interprete italiano.
Oh, benissimo, perché non c'era. Sono arrivata adesso e vedevo che non c'era nessuno. Bravissimo. Allora posso stare io. O facciamo per uno? Ok.
If you go to the store and buy a sack of charcoal, it might have some petroleum additives to make it burn evenly or light quickly. It might have some hickory smoked flavoring that's made of, you don't want to know, creosote. It might have some Jack Daniels in it. It might be any number of things in the charcoal. That's not biochar. Yeah? So what we want when we say biochar is pure carbon, nothing but. And I get that by taking biomass, photosynthesis, trees, plants, materials, any kind of material like that. You can actually use human sewage, it's the same, it's got carbon in it. Dry it out, char it. Animal manure also. And as you take it up in temperature in an oven, you're not actually burning it, you're baking it. And there's lots of different ways to do this. I described a couple earlier, but I can tell you more about them. You take it and you burn it without oxygen. So it's actually baking. It's not able to burn. It doesn't make smoke. It doesn't make ash. It bakes. And as it comes up above 400 degrees, the different volatiles in it begin to break and turn into gases. They leave the cells of the plant and they go into gas. 500 degrees, more. 600 degrees, more. Now you're starting to get all of these different chemicals, all these different elements that are turning into volatile gases. And those go off, and those can be burned, and they should be burned. You should be using that heat. You should be using that fire. There's no reason they need to go to the atmosphere. You can use that for electricity. You can use that for heating a greenhouse. You can use that for lots of different good things. If you've done that properly, when you're done, you quench the fire, stop it before it goes to ash, and what's left is the carbon, biocarbon. Just the carbon, nothing else. Okay, so what I next did was I took it down in size from these big chunks that look just like a piece of the tree or a piece of the plant. And if you look in a microscope, you could look in this and you see the same structure of the plant, the cells and the veins and arteries of the plant, the vascular system of the plant. It's still there. It's just hardened off into just the carbon skeleton. But I want to take it even smaller. I want to take it down to the size that an earthworm can digest. I need to take it down to the size that it goes in the front of the worm and comes out the back of the worm. And in the process, it takes all of the gut bacteria from the worm, fills the pores, fills the structures inside the char. Yeah? Only it's not necessarily a worm. It's just filling the pores and being small that gives it a very large surface area. Gives it its effect in the garden. So for gardening purposes, I want to get my char very small, and I want to put it in my compost so I can get lots of these microorganisms first. If I'm going to use this just to filter water, this is the right size. I can put this into a net bag. I can put this into the pond over here, and in a week there will be no more algae on that pond. I can put this into a water filter next to my sink. I can put this into any place I'm wanting to clean water, and it will filter the water. After that, I can use it again. I can take it in and grind it down and use it for the garden or something else. Yeah.
How long might you use it to filter it?
Why? Yeah. It can just flow right through. Yeah. It takes out smells. It takes out gray water smell. You know that ammonium smell you have off of gray water? What happens is those pores have a magnetic effect on their walls. It's called Cation Exchange. They have this kind of like surface that is, it holds certain elements, and one of those elements it holds is nitrogen. So as the nitrogen passes through the pore structure, it sticks to the walls. Well, if you have it in a fish pond and the fish are pooping all the time, you're going to get an ammonia smell and you have to clean your water all the time. But if you have the biochar in there, it takes the nitrogen. Now it becomes really good fertilizer, but there's no nitrogen in the pond, so you can't get ammonium, so you can't get the smell. If you feed it to the fish have good digestion, they poop out the biochar, the pond stays nice smelling, and the fish grow faster because the water is cleaner. So they grow about 30% faster in a pond where they've been fed biochar. If you feed it to a cow, cows have this fermentation going in their stomachs, and they're doing this digestion all the time that's involving fermentation. They have intestinal fauna, they have microbes living in their gut that are doing this work of fermenting for them. If you give them biochar in their feed, 2% is enough daily, their digestion gets so much better that there's 30% less methane emitted in their farts and their burps to the atmosphere, 30% less. Wow. Their weight gain goes up very quickly. Their feed efficiency is very high, meaning you have to feed them less to get the same amount of weight gain. And they're healthier because they have really good digestion. And so you don't need antibiotics. So they learned this in Switzerland. Naturally, it's a country that has a lot of dairy products. And so they started to use this in Switzerland, and now every farmer in Switzerland wants to use it for their cows because they've learned that they can reduce the cost of antibiotics, they can have healthier herds, they put on weight faster, they have less feed that they feed them, all of these good effects of adding a little bit of charcoal in the feed. So now there are feed companies in formulating biochar into the feed pellets that they feed animals in Switzerland. This is starting to spread into Italy. It's starting to spread into Spain. It cannot go to the United States because it's illegal there. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, which I like to call the U.S. has a prohibition on adding charcoal to animal feeds. So, c'est la vie.
One question.
Yeah.
How big has to be the carbon to feed the cow?
Usually it gets put into a powder and then put into a pellet.
Okay.
Yeah, so... This is made from manure, from human manure. That's biochar from human manure. And it is, it's what we call a phosphorized fertilizer. It's got a little higher phosphorus content. And that's the perfect grade for feeding to animals or putting into the ground, right? This is the fertilizer that's now being sold from municipal waste treatment plants. I have friends that have it every day in their tea. It's like activated carbon. It scavenges a toxin. It's a chelating agent. Yes, they feed it to chickens. They use it for animal litter, so that when you're putting the fodder in the chicken coop, it removes the smell of the chicken or the poultry enclosure immediately. If you walk by the turkeys over here, you smell the ammonia before you get there. If you had the biochar just this size even, laid down in the bedding of the turkeys over here, that smell would go away immediately. There's places in the field where you can smell the drain field, where the kitchen goes to the gray water. You can smell it in certain parts of the field. If you had the biochar in the top end of the drain field, it would wash down into that drain field and that smell would completely disappear. All right, so where do we stand? Do we have the material? What are you doing? Yeah, okay. So go ahead and start mixing in some water. This time, I don't think we're going to put the straw because it'll make it too difficult. Okay, so we're a little bit ad hoc, but the ratio I was going for was 2 parts clay, 2 parts sand, 1 part Portland cement, 1 part biochar. It's not quite that, but it's approximate. We ran out of, I was crushing the biochar by foot, and I didn't quite get very much, so that's the way it goes. All right, questions? Yeah.
The Swiss biochar okay, the big companies are now formulating it, giving to the farmers.
Yeah.
So we're talking thousands of tons of stuff. So presumably they're buying their ingredients from other commercial sources. So somebody in Switzerland is making biochar on a large scale from what?
Good question. And as far as I know, most of that is coming from woody wastes from cities. Old pallets, cardboard, things that go into the landfill that can be taken out as woody wastes. There may be some plant materials like crop residues. A lot of that has to go back to the field for the carbon cycle. But some of it may actually be coming off to be used for that, like from manufacturing plants, cereal manufacturers, things like that would probably have some waste streams that we've tapped in. They did a study in Australia to see, do they have enough woody biomass if the biochar industry got really big all of a sudden and everybody wanted to buy it to fertilize their gardens and their fields and their orchards and their cows, how would they possibly meet that demand? And they found that they could meet the entire demand of Australia for the next 50 years from just two sources: paper mill waste and chicken litter, the waste material that comes out of a chicken barn. Just those two sources are enough to supply the industry in Australia. We looked at, in my new book, Burn, we were looking at the non-agricultural uses of biochar because we're trying to get it to scale up enough that you can take as much out of the atmosphere as humans have put in since the start of the Industrial Revolution. So what happens when you make biochar? You change the form of the carbon. It goes from a simple bond where it's bonded to other elements easily and microbes can eat it as a food, and it goes into the plant, and maybe the plant falls over dead and it goes back to the atmosphere as methane or gets burned and goes back as carbon dioxide. It's up there for a few years, it rains back down, it's the next year's plants, and it's part of that carbon cycle. We've added fossil fuels for 200 years, and now we've put too much in the atmosphere and too much in the ocean. We need to take all that legacy out, that whole industrial era. We need to take it out of the ocean and out of the atmosphere. So how can you possibly do that? Well, if you can make more photosynthesis by planting more trees, more forests. We used to have 6 trillion trees on this planet before the Industrial Revolution. Now we're down to 3 trillion. So just put back those 3 trillion for starters. And with permaculture, we can green a lot more places. We've seen that at Tamara. So what we need to do, and also we can use water systems. You can make forests of kelp in the ocean. So there are lots of ways to make forests. So more photosynthesis. And then while we're making more photosynthesis, we need to intercept that material before it goes back to the atmosphere. It needs to take a time out. It needs to take a break. We can take a break for 1,000 years pretty safely and be quite happy about it. So what we want to do is we want to find ways to put the carbon away, to lock it up. And biochar allows us to put it into a form that microbes don't digest, which means it'll be there in 1,000 years. It'll be there in 1,000,000 years. So as much of it as we can put into biochar, we're trying to do. That can take us, conceivably, could take us back down to a comfortable Holocene epoch from the Anthropocene. We looked at how much we could put into agriculture, and so far the best science tells us about 1.7 gigatons of carbon per year can go into agriculture as biochar. It's not enough. The world right now puts 37 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere every year. So we need to get at least that much held back. So we need to find 37 gigatons, not 1.7. So where do we find 37 gigatons? In our book, Kathleen and I were able to find 60 gigatons from just a few discrete sources, and that was putting biochar into cement, asphalt highways, replacement for sand. And so by making biochar cement or biochar roads, we could get 60 gigatons per year of carbon dioxide removal happening there. Now here's another thing you need to know. Every time you take a kilogram of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, the ocean, which has too much carbon dioxide, says, oh, and blows that carbon dioxide back up into the atmosphere from the ocean because they're in balance. And so the ocean always puts back what you take out. We're really good at putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but we've never had the experience of actually taking it out at a large scale. And the ocean's not our friend in this because the ocean wants to keep refilling whatever we take out. So for every kilogram that we take from the atmosphere, we actually have to take 2 kilograms if we want to balance what the ocean's going to put back in. So we're taking it out of the ocean too. We're taking it out of both at the same time. Ready? I think that's pretty good looking. Yeah. So here's the next step. Yeah. So we're going to make a couple bricks. So we could change the highways. If we change all the highways so they have just like 2% biochar, which is actually stronger than sand, it's better for your tires, does all these other good things. In Sweden, those of you who live in Stockholm might know this already, they're tearing up the sidewalks and tearing up the roads and putting biochar down to a depth of 3 meters everywhere in Sweden. They started in Stockholm 5 years ago. It was so good that the trees in Stockholm look like 30-year-old trees after 3 years. They just bloom when they put the biochar under the roads and under the sidewalks. And it cleans the water, so the water reaching the Baltic is no longer dirty. It's clean before it gets there. And it was so successful in Stockholm, and it cooled the city in the heat waves. It was so successful in Stockholm and cleaned the air that every other city in Sweden is now starting to do it. In fact, they started doing it so much that they ran out of places to get the char. And so now Finland has gone into production of biochar for Sweden. And Finland is making giant biochar production facilities to supply Sweden so that Sweden can fix all its roads and sidewalks. Of course, they're not doing that yet in Finland. I don't know why. Sooner or later, they'll figure that part out.
So they burn the wood?
So Finland has always been doing this large biomass thing. That's part of their thing. They have these large plantation forests. I don't actually equate the two. A plantation is not a forest. Forest is mixed age, mixed species, all the biota, all the biodiversity, all the services a forest does. It's not a plantation. In Finland, they do a lot of plantations. But hopefully they'll learn. Permaculture. You need to teach more permaculture. Okay, so if you can get 60 gigaton removal by methods like Stockholm is using, then we could say that we could start to bring it from 417 parts per million to 410 to 400 to 390 to 380 to 370 to 360 to 350 parts per million. Heck, why stop there? Let's go back to pre-industrial, 260 parts per million. And we can do that in decades. If we get back to 350, the ice will begin to form again at the poles. So, what's needed? Why don't we do that? Well, first off, not very many people know about this. There's a whole lot of science being done, thousands of peer-reviewed journal articles. This is a very active area of science, but they need proof by seeing it done. So the example of Stockholm was a really good one because people can actually go there and see those trees and how much better they're growing in the city, and how much cleaner the air is, and how much cleaner the water in the Baltic is as a result of this. Eco-villages offer an opportunity here to be another kind of demonstration. If we can start to build buildings that have biochar in the walls and pave the outside with biochar brick and have the biochar in our gardens, which makes our plants grow better, and use biochar air filters and biochar water filters, that's a way of getting the world to start to follow that example. They need to see examples. So I'm calling them now e-cool villages. This is cool tech. So we're trying to create a cool meme. We want to make something cool. We want everybody to do it because it's cool. Right? So e-cool villages. So those who came more recently. This is a paper that I made out of old newspapers and biochar. And when I put this over a wall socket, you know, if you have like a light switch or an electric plug in the wall, if you have a tri-field strength meter, something that measures the electric magnetic fields, and you go over to that, you'll see it bump up as you get closer to the wall switch because the electric field is there. Some people would call that electrosmog because we're always bathed in these electric fields every day and they affect us. If you put this over the wall switch or over the electric wall socket, it goes to zero. It doesn't go through. So now imagine a building code that requires all of the new buildings to have this, or a plastic that's made of this, as the conduit box. So there's no more electromagnetic smog in the room whenever you have this in the wall. And that's another great place to, you know, you can do this to whatever thickness, right? And the thing about the biochar is now you're storing carbon first, and secondly, you're cleaning the room from the smells and the pollen and the mold, so you get all those benefits. And you're getting the thermal, your electrosmog is also intercepted. So that's another big one, right? That's another couple of gigatons out of the atmosphere every year if we just start replacing those. I started making a biochar plastic. This is a polymer, a composite, which is made of biochar. Just a hard plastic. And I took polystyrene, which is the bags you get at the grocery, or egg crates that are made of polystyrene, or the styrofoam that comes with your computer. This you can take and melt in a vat of acetone, and then you add biochar and stir, wear goggles, wear a mask, and you then pour it into a mold. I could make a surfboard, I could make roofing tile, I could make shoes, I could make anything with this, and I'm taking that plastic now back from wherever it was going, the ocean probably, and I'm adding biochar to it and reusing it for something that's really useful, like roofing tile. There's a women's cooperative in India that's adding biochar to face creams and detox face packs and body scrubs and detox shampoos and soaps, and it's good because it scrubs really well. And again, what happens to it when it goes down the sink? It cleans the drain water. It takes away the ammonium. It stores the nitrogen. It's now moving off into wherever it's going next, charged up and ready to serve the planet as a soil structure somewhere.
What is biochar? Can you explain for
Charcoal from a
This is garden in a can. Seeds and biochar. You pop the lid, you add water, and you get dill. Or you can get a can of oregano, or thyme, or sage, or whatever. Pop the lid, add water. It's got biochar in it. It's going to grow prolifically for however long you keep adding water. And you take care of it. You can have it on your windowsill or whatever. So it's biochar going out into the general gardening market in a very simple, straightforward way. This is Biochar Deodorizer. You can put this in your refrigerator, take away the smells. You can put it in your shoes when they're stored in the closet. You can put it in your closet just to take away smells. I keep it in my luggage when I'm traveling because maybe I can't do my laundry every stop. So I want to have this, making my next clothes smell good. Bamboo biochar. Bamboo is an interesting plant. I grow a lot of it. I grow probably 30 different varieties of bamboo in Tennessee. We're not in the tropics, we're subtropical. We get snow in the winter. But bamboo has thousands of varieties and they grow in the high Himalayas out to the desert. It's a perennial, it's a grass. And it's also an evergreen, so it's green in the winter. It's taking carbon and storing carbon in its roots all the year. And then because it needs to be cultivated, it needs to have maintenance, you need to not just leave the grove, it has to take out the dead wood and so forth. So you can have a continuous yield of about 30% of the grove every year that comes off. It's a very fast growing plant. And that 30% can be making biochar. So you're taking carbon out of the lay biocarbon cycle, out of the circular cycle, you're putting it into mineral form, and you're storing it from the bamboo cycle. Very easy thing to do. And I can make, using a pit method, I can make about 4 wheelbarrows in 45 minutes of bamboo biochar. So I might only have to do that twice a year to take care of my garden. Or maybe I'm going to be doing some plastering or some painting or some bricks or something, so maybe I'll make a little bit more. Very easy to do. Yeah, good.
Does it have to be pretty?
What's the horseshoe? What's that? I thought it was for luck. Okay.
Could be.
Yeah, it is luck. Questions? Yeah.
You're talking about storing it, but it seems like you need to plant new trees in order to get it and then burn it in a certain way. Is there any other way than burning it?
I don't want to get into plantation forests of biomass.
Yeah, so
I don't want to encourage an industry of genetically modified eucalypts in order to produce biochar. That's not what you want to do. You want to find waste streams. And believe me, from our analysis in our book, there's plenty of waste. You can go to any municipal landfill and find pallets and find woody waste. I mentioned before paper mill waste or chicken litter or any number of different sources. You can find that. That's not necessary to go out and plant trees. You should do an analysis of your local food shed anyway. You should know what is being wasted right around you, within 5 miles, 10 miles or kilometers. How far out can you go easily to gather in some waste? Sometimes you find people who will give you wastes, like power companies that are coming through and they're trimming the trees around the power lines, and they will deliver you chipped wood directly to your site if you want, because they don't know what to do with it. So you can get those kinds of sources, and you don't have to go, doing plantation trees. I do bamboo because I use bamboo for lots of things, and it's got hundreds of or thousands of uses, and so I have enough bamboos all the time that I take the dead stuff, the old stuff, and use that, or the cuttings. Okay, she asks how to make the biochar in an ecological way. Yes. So the best way is to make a retort. I mentioned the open fire, and that's a very simple way, the idea of a giant bowl that you would just have in the earth, but you're losing all the heat. You're losing some of the gases that could be distilled into something useful. If you build, there's a design that you can download for free on the internet, and you can go to YouTube and see it being built. You can see it being operated. It's called the Kontiki, K-O-N-T-I-K-I. It was developed by the Ithaca Institute in Switzerland, and it's a free design, and it's for the people. You can build one for a few €100 if you know a welder. If your welder charges you too much, it might be a few thousand. But what you do is you build something that's like a big wok. or it can be like a pyramid upside down. And you build the fire in that, and you can put a hood over it. And you can move the heat in the hood off to a greenhouse or to heat your home. You can capture the gases without burning them if you want to and store them for later use. You can make wood vinegar, which is useful for a wood preservative or a pesticide or for other uses, using this Kontiki design. And you can't do that with an open fire, or you can't do that if you're doing it in your hearth or in your baking oven. You can't do it that way. But if you build a Kontiki or you build a different retort design, you can make these things. You can use all of that heat very efficiently. So when I add biochar to a clay mix like this, it hardens very quickly, and it becomes almost like stone, and it will get harder and harder for years until it really feels like stone. You need a chisel to be able to cut into it. It makes it, the carbon in this actually is a very good structure for the formation of a very solid material.
So,
Before you mentioned that you can make biochar also from paper or leftover from the plastic, but I don't understand how, because I'm interested, because I know I can get it very easily for free.
Paper is difficult because it goes to ash so easily.
Yeah, exactly. So to have those,
Yeah.
I can only imagine wood.
I would use paper to start the fire, but I wouldn't use it to make biochar because it's going to go to ash. Cardboard is a different story. Depends on how hard and how big and how thick it is. Particle board you can use. There are different kinds of ways that you can do it, but you don't want it to go to ash. And so you look at the material and see. Green bamboo you don't want. You want the dry bamboo.
Yeah, for example, I have lots of bamboo and also leftover cuttings from firewood.
Yeah.
But then I have to turn off the fire.
Let it dry first, because what happens is when it's just new and green, it's cellulose, it's hemicellulose, it's a green growing thing with a green vascular structure. After it dries, or as the cells die, they lignify, they become like a hard wood, right? Lignin is what you want to make the biochar carbon skeleton, not cellulose, not hemicellulose. So you want that, and that's why grasses are not as good and straw is not as good as wood or bamboo or something that's lignous. About bamboo?
can you repeat the question?
But people will tell you, well, we don't know that we can actually make negative carbon work. And we don't have the proof that we can do that, but actually we do have the proof that we can do that. But it involves trees. We need more trees. So if you're going to make biochar, you want to be planting more trees. Not necessarily different kinds of fruit and nuts and different things. Beautiful example of the food forest. So more trees in more ways, and that helps everything. And then we find that we have enough wastes. We can just go around and identify waste. And we have